Good evening. We begin tonight with breaking news out of Washington. Just moments ago, the United States Senate passed a budget plan aimed at funding Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and Customs and Border Protection, known as CBP. This vote marks what lawmakers are calling the first step in a renewed effort to reopen the Department of Homeland Security, which has been partially shut down since mid-February. We're taking a live look right now at the Capitol, where the debate has been unfolding for hours. The chamber has just adjourned after a long night of procedural votes, speeches, and political maneuvering. Let's walk through what happened, what it means, and what comes next. According to the Associated Press, the Senate adopted a budget plan that would fund ICE and Border Patrol over Democratic objections. Republicans moved forward using a process known as budget reconciliation, a procedural maneuver that allows certain legislation to pass with a simple majority in the Senate. That's significant. Under normal circumstances, most legislation in the Senate requires 60 votes to overcome a filibuster. Republicans currently hold 53 seats. That means they cannot typically pass major bills without Democratic support. But reconciliation changes the math. It allows certain fiscal measures to move forward with just 51 votes. It's the same process that was used previously to pass a major package of tax and spending cuts last year without Democratic votes. Tonight's vote sets the stage for further action in the House of Representatives, where lawmakers will now consider the funding plan. The Department of Homeland Security has been shut down since mid-February after Democrats demanded policy changes in the wake of fatal shootings involving federal agents and protesters. Republicans, in response, have argued that ICE and Border Patrol must remain fully funded to protect the nation's borders and enforce immigration laws. This has become one of the most heated policy battles in Washington. Let's break down the political backdrop. Democratic leaders have pushed for amendments aimed at lowering health care costs, reducing child care expenses, protecting school meals, and addressing rising grocery and gasoline prices. During debate, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer criticized the Republican strategy, arguing that the focus should be on easing the cost of living burden for American families rather than directing up to $140 billion toward ICE funding. Schumer said Democrats offered amendments throughout the night, giving Republicans opportunities to vote on measures addressing everyday costs. According to him, those amendments were rejected. He argued that Americans are struggling with soaring living expenses, groceries, gasoline, electricity, and that lawmakers should prioritize those concerns. On the other side, Senate Majority Leader John Thune defended the reconciliation approach. He described it as a multi-step process, but said that, in the end, Republicans would ensure that America's borders remain secure and prevent what they describe as attempts to defund key enforcement agencies. Republican leaders have framed the funding measure as essential to national security. They argue that DHS, ICE, and Border Patrol personnel must be paid and supported, especially during a period of heightened border activity and enforcement demands. As part of the procedural process tonight, senators also navigated a so-called vote-a-rama, an open-ended series of amendment votes that often accompanies reconciliation bills. These sessions can last through the night and involve dozens of politically charged amendments. In addition to the DHS funding measure, senators addressed nominations and other legislative business, including moving to consider calendar items related to executive appointments and extending Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act for 3 years. Section 702 allows U.S. intelligence agencies to collect foreign intelligence from non-U.S. persons located outside the country. That extension, if passed, would maintain certain surveillance authorities that have been debated heavily in recent months. The Senate also processed a nomination for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Procedural votes were held to move toward cloture, limiting debate on that nomination. But the headline tonight remains the budget plan for ICE and CBP. Let's explain what reconciliation means in practical terms. Budget reconciliation is a tool Congress can use to align spending and revenue policies with a previously adopted budget resolution. It's often controversial because it bypasses the 60-vote threshold normally required to overcome a filibuster. However, reconciliation has limitations. The Senate parliamentarian reviews provisions to determine whether they qualify under reconciliation rules. Measures must primarily affect federal spending, revenue, or debt limits. Policy provisions that do not have a budgetary impact may be stripped out. That means the path forward is not automatic. There will be scrutiny, there may be challenges, and the House must also approve any final version. Now let's look at the broader context. The Department of Homeland Security oversees a wide range of agencies, including ICE, CBP, the Coast Guard, the Secret Service, and others. The shutdown has affected operations and personnel, particularly those considered non-essential under funding restrictions. Republicans argue that delaying funding jeopardizes border security and the ability of agents to perform their duties. Democrats argue that oversight and reform must accompany funding, especially in light of recent controversies and the fatal incidents involving federal agents. Both sides are digging in. Tonight's vote signals that Senate Republicans are willing to proceed independently if necessary, using procedural tools available to them. However, reconciliation is not the final step. The House will need to take up the measure. Differences between Senate and House versions, if any, must be resolved, and the Senate parliamentarian may rule on specific provisions. In addition to the funding debate, there are broader political implications. We are in an election cycle environment. Immigration remains one of the most polarizing issues in American politics. Border security, enforcement funding, and agency oversight are central campaign topics. This vote is likely to shape messaging on both sides. Democrats are emphasizing cost of living concerns and calling for votes on health care affordability, child care, and grocery relief. Republicans are emphasizing border security, national safety, and support for federal law enforcement personnel. Let's also talk about the financial aspect. The proposal reportedly directs up to $140 billion toward ICE and related enforcement activities. That figure has become a focal point in the debate. Critics argue that the funding could instead be used to address domestic economic pressures. Supporters argue that secure borders and immigration enforcement are foundational responsibilities of the federal government. What happens next? The House of Representatives will now consider the budget plan. If it passes there, it will move forward for implementation under reconciliation rules. Expect continued debate over amendments, expect legal and procedural scrutiny, and expect political messaging to intensify. We also heard statements from DHS leadership emphasizing that their mission is to protect the homeland and that funding shortfalls are affecting personnel who serve in law enforcement capacities. Opponents argue that reform must accompany funding and that oversight cannot be separated from budget decisions. As the Senate adjourned tonight, procedural motions were adopted to move into executive session and process nominations. The chamber then agreed to stand adjourned until Monday at 3 p.m. when business will resume. So to recap, the Senate has passed a budget plan aimed at funding ICE and Border Patrol. It did so using budget reconciliation, allowing passage with a simple majority. The Department of Homeland Security has been partially shut down since mid-February. The vote now sends the measure to the House. Democrats objected, arguing that cost of living issues should take priority. Republicans argue that border security funding is urgent and essential. This is not the final chapter. It is the first step in what could be a multi-week legislative process. We will continue to monitor developments in the House, any rulings from the Senate parliamentarian, and reactions from the White House and agency leadership. For now, the Senate has acted, and the debate over immigration funding, border security, and federal spending continues. Stay with us for further updates as this story develops.